Welcome back to the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm Chris Bishop. Now, please carry on sending us your feedback via email and Twitter. Now, still with me in the studio, I have the man behind Global Micro Solutions, JJ Milner. So, you just tell us a little bit about that transition to being a fully fledged player in the IT market.
I think the biggest challenge is to extract yourself out of the business. We were very hands-on. I've done every job. I've been a driver, I've been a tea lady, I've climbed in ceilings to run network cabling. And to let go of certain parts of the business and pick the right people, that's probably the hardest thing for a founder to do. And we've been fortunate we managed to attract amazing talent. Every single person in the company is a shareholder. That was one of the things we did from day one. So everyone has a sense of ownership, and there's a strong team spirit. So that was probably the most important thing, was to set up the structures. We also don't believe in middle management. So everyone is responsible for doing what they need to do, and there's no layers of confusion in between.
Because on this program, that's one of the greatest, saddest stories we always get, is the fact that people build these businesses around themselves, and when they pack it in or they pass on or whatever, then the business itself, they knew what was going on and no one else did. But begs the question, why is it that entrepreneurs every day still do the same thing? They build this entire structure around themselves and no one else can run it.
I think we're control freaks, right?
But isn't that the problem? You want to be control freaks, I'm good for you on the one hand. Yeah. On the other hand, isn't it create problems?
It does. And we try to follow a process of see one, do one, teach one. And that way you can be involved and you can let someone else try their hand at it, and then eventually you have to step away. And as long as you're building new things, there can still be those areas for us control freaks to hold on to. Maybe it's the newer products or the newer iterations or processes. And there's always a new chapter in the business. So you can still immerse yourself in it, but make sure that you build something that's sustainable going forward.
And now there are plenty of businesses like yourself. How tough is the competition here in 2012 in Africa?
I think that the challenge that we're facing right now is that despite the economic downturn, cloud and IT providers are in effect a kind of credit provider, because we make these huge investments in infrastructure and we're now charging an easy to consume monthly fee just for what you need. And so it's quite easy to fake it for a while. And eventually customers get wise to the differences between a mature player and someone who's got a team behind them, and a brand that they would normally have associated or trusted that's trying their hand at these sorts of things. So it's a challenge in that respect, because you literally can't look at your competition. You've got to keep doing what you're doing and stay the course. But too often, particularly in technology, you're so busy looking in your rearview mirror and trying to do what the competition are doing that you'll end up making the wrong choices. So it's difficult to get the price right and deliver the service when there's so much noise. But customers are wising up. South Africans are quite savvy when it comes to technology.
But that's my point. Isn't that one of the scary things about your business, that somewhere in a garage, somewhere in this town, there's some young 18-year-old who's sitting there coming up with things that maybe we haven't even heard of yet?
Well, I was just at Demo Africa. That Demo is the event that launched Salesforce.com. I was in Kenya, and I was amazed at how many 2- or 3-man businesses with some amazing ideas were there. But the difference now is we live in a mobile world, and reach is actually probably one of the biggest strengths of an IT business. You need to have a presence where your customers are. So I think that the model's going to change a little bit, and that the entrepreneurs will need to partner up and find someone to distribute their content or distribute their ideas. So I think there's a role for both.
And that's one of the great stories of the continent, the amount of money and investment that Kenya has put into building up. I mean, it's one of the stories that we've been covering this year, about how quickly it's grown. You're going into the continent. What are you seeing the opportunities for IT?
Absolutely, mobile is dominating the African story for a multitude of reasons, but also because they don't have legacy investments and they can leapfrog technology. They can get the pell of whatever the next technology revolution is. And there's amazing growth and there's amazing awareness on the ground. I literally walked out of my hotel in Nairobi and just picked a direction and walked. And maybe 10 Kenyans stopped me. It might have been the event tag around my neck advertising me as a tourist, but I had some amazing conversations. They were worldly, they're savvy, they understand the subtleties of business, and there's an energy there. They don't have the sort of depression that the rest of the world has. There's a can-do, frontier kind of attitude. And I think that's going to stand Africa in good stead, and that's why we're going to expand into 5 African countries over the next 24 months.
I mean, where do you think it's going, this whole IT business? I mean, we were just joking the other day with my colleagues. They were saying, oh, one day people will be able to call up a little hologram or tell them where to get off the bus. But where do you think it's going? I mean,
well, your mother will always be able to get hold of you. That I can assure you.
Sure, always.
Yeah, I mean, that was
on a handheld in the bush.
Exactly. I just think it's going to become more interactive. The disconnect right now, you still think of a PC and you still think of your iPad, and I think it'll just become more immersive. The technology is maturing, the performance and the, I wouldn't say artificial intelligence, because that might be stretching a bit far when you go to the fridge and it knows what you want to order, but just that how intuitive and how responsive these systems work with you. I think that's going to be a natural trend. And
what about the infrastructure? That's one of the great things that people are talking about. I mean, all over this town, Johannesburg, people are digging up the roads and the pathways, putting down the fibre optic cables. But do you think there's enough investment going on in the continent?
I think there's some tremendous investment going on. You've got some legacy barriers to entry, and companies are preserving their historical investments. But we're still seeing a halving of cost and a doubling in capacity every 6 months. So I don't think we're getting enough investment in certain areas, but certainly every month is better than the month before. And I think South Africans sometimes lose sight of that. We're so fixated upon looking across the shores. We do have African conditions and we do have African problems to solve. And from an IT perspective, it's never been easier than it is today to deliver our services to customers, and that must tell you that they're doing something right.
And there's one of the great issues as well in your business, costs. I mean, one of the things, it is a fast-growing market, but there are still a lot of people excluded because they simply can't afford to cross that digital divide. How do you think this continent is ever going to get those people to be part of this revolution?
I don't think we're going to have a choice. When I was talking to another Kenyan entrepreneur who was selling multimedia content, he started his presentation to the audience and said, no one can afford my content, someone else is going to have to pay. So you'll find new media, whether it be advertising revenue or whether it's subsidies or whether it's consumption based on the data you're using rather than the actual content. But it will happen naturally. The people need these services on the ground. And they will consume them. You only have to look at Brazil to see that the pricing structures, what you pay for software in Brazil, is very different to what we pay here, because the vendors realize that there's $1 to spend or R1 to spend, and they're not going to get any more, so they might as well take the dollar. And when you own intellectual property, you want to get the maximum price you can for that. And if you've done your research on the market, it'll all sort itself out.
Well, it sounds like a lot of blue sky, it sounds like a lot of optimism in your business, but what are the greatest problems facing the IT business in Africa right now?
Skills. Skills and attracting the right kind of people. The one positive of the overseas downturn is that the grass isn't greener on the other side. They realize there's maybe a bit more manure there than was a couple of years ago. So it's not in vogue to be talking about immigration. But we are having to compete with vendors and companies for both products and staff in dollars. So the exchange rate movements and having to buffer South Africans from that, both in terms of retaining the skills and competing against these enormous companies who apparently don't have to make profits as long as they're acquiring new subscribers, they can come in because the bandwidth is better, because South Africa is no longer isolated electronically from the rest of the world. So that's a challenge, but we have a challenge all the time. That's business.
But you say skills, the new generation's coming up. I assume we're applying to your business. I mean, I don't know about you, but whenever I get a new phone, I give it to my 12-year-old daughter, and she gives it me back, and I oh, thank you very much. But I mean, do you find that people are kind of growing up at an increasingly young age to do this sort of stuff?
You know, I kind of was the same, albeit with a keyboard rather than a touch screen. I just think that's a natural consequence. Kids learn very, very quickly, and they'll adapt. And it just shows you a product like Apple. I'm not particularly an Apple user, but how intuitive it is. They've got something right in that mix. It's going to happen. You'll have a wave. Each generation will bring their own finesse, their own touch, their own interpretation of the technology. But ultimately, the same needs need to be fulfilled. I'm not necessarily sold on some of these vaporware pursuits, some of the social networking aspects. I think have maybe been blown out of proportion in terms of the opportunities that they present. But there's still some real business needs there, and ultimately those will come through.
But we talked about Y2K earlier in the program. I mean, one of the things that we used to talk about all the time was viruses. Oh no, you get a virus, the computer's finished, etc. But do you think that the IT industry is winning the war against these sort of things?
Security is always a problem, and I think there's a naivety around particularly elements of privacy, identity, theft. We've all been waiting for this big bandwidth that you were talking about, but with that means that our attack vector for them to come through a large pipe is increasing all the time. And IT security, particularly with a connected world where you've got your cell phone and your iPad and your laptop, it's a bigger business than ever before, and one of the highest growth areas, especially mobile.
And where do you see yourself and your business in the next 5 to 10 years in this continent? What are your ambitions?
We're focusing on growing our reseller channel. We're fortunate enough to have 27 partners on the ground in South Africa who articulate and sell our services to their customers. We'd like to replicate that model in 5 countries. Kenya will be first, Ghana will be second. We're still exploring the others, trying to literally walk the blocks of the streets and see what the feel is and where there's going to be a good fit.
And yourself, do you have any entrepreneurs that you look up to?
I think Elon Musk is one that has to come to mind. He just seems to have a knack for building things at incredible scale.
And this is the South African who's over there building rockets in the United States.
Rockets and the Tesla. He's just done some amazing world-changing things. Some entrepreneurs see a gap and they build a good business. Very few get the opportunity to do things that a generation will remember, that you'll be in a worldwide yearbook. So I think hats off to him.
And how would you like to be remembered, maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now?
Someone who kept their word.
Kept going.
Kept going, but kept their word. I think that's probably the one thing that I respect out of the kind of names we've been talking about on the show. Not enough people do business on a handshake, and I think that would be something with all this technology that I'd like to see come back.
And finally, you have a young child on the way, you were telling me?
Yeah, 5th of January, I lose control of my life, my diary, my wallet.
Now, this child, will they be an entrepreneur?
It'll be whatever its mother says it can be.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights. It's been a fascinating conversation. And best of luck in the continent and best of luck in the IT business, because obviously you've walked the path already. JJ Milner.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week on the Entrepreneurial Edge. From me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye, and thank you very much for watching.